good afternoon everyone again. Welcome back. Also good afternoon or good evening or good morning to everyone who's joining us online through live streaming. We are going to start with the second session. I just thought that I'm not going to introduce Jeremy Harmer once again, obviously. We know enough of his professional background, so I just thought probably you may want to know a little bit about his personal passions and interests. So you know that besides being a teacher trainer and an influential figure in English language teaching field, Jeremy Harmer is a musician. And today we are going to have a music show during which Jeremy Harmer is going to sing Shakespeare and other folks. All of you are invited, it's free of charge, and you can attend the session. But besides that, two interesting facts about Jeremy Harmer. The first one, he started learning violin at the age of 43, and he's playing in Cambridge Philharmonic Orchestra. Actually, he's got a rehearsal on Monday evening, so this is serious. This much, we are going to start with the second session, which is called Telling and Retelling. Jeremy is going to take us to the world of storytelling, and he's going to show us how we can tell stories more effectively, but probably more importantly, how we can use the stories to teach language and have the students retell these stories. Please join me to welcome Jeremy Harmer.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not sure that my microphone is switched on. No, it isn't. Wait a minute, let's see. Aha, that's better. Yep, good. You mentioned the Cambridge Philharmonic, Ade, and I have to say that every December in our orchestra we do a live performance of an opera. It's great fun. And so we have the singers standing in front of the audience and sort of half acting and trying to make themselves heard above the noise. And this year we're doing Eugene Onegin, which some of you will know. It's a beautiful opera. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. This is about storytelling, and I want to tell you a story, if you don't mind. Does anyone know where that is? Any guesses? India, that's in India. That's the airport at New Delhi. I've never been to that airport because it's new. But the story I want to tell you is about the time that I went to the old airport of New Delhi. And the British Council had invited me to India to do some talks. And so I left Cambridge, where I live, and went to Heathrow. And I was doing it with Lufthansa, you know the German airline Lufthansa? And so that meant I had to fly from Heathrow to Frankfurt. And then from Frankfurt, I took a plane to New Delhi. And it was nice. It was a long flight, quite a long flight, but it was okay. It was fine. And it was nice. And I got to New Delhi, which the old airport, I mean, you can't imagine. It was very hot and stuffy. The air conditioning didn't really work. And it was just very chaotic and rather old, you know. This was a few years ago, obviously. And we arrived at about 2:30 in the morning, Indian time. So I got off the plane and stood waiting for my suitcase around the carousel. And I stood. And I stood. And I stood, and I kept standing, and everyone else got their suitcases, except for me. And my suitcase hadn't arrived. So you get a bit in despair, you get a bit in despair there. So I was really, really kind of desperate. What do I do? So there was a Lufthansa desk, and I went to the Lufthansa desk, and I said, I'm afraid my suitcase hasn't arrived. And they said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir. And they went, and they said, it didn't get put on the aeroplane in Frankfurt, but we'll bring it tomorrow. So you just have to tell us where you're staying, and then we'll have the suitcase sent. And it was at that moment that I realized I'd done something really stupid. For the first and last time in my life, I'd left all the details of my trip in my suitcase. So I had absolutely no idea where I was staying. I'd never looked at the name of my hotel because I knew that someone would meet me and take me to the hotel. And this was in the days before I could look at my emails on the phone. I might have had an original mobile phone, but it wasn't a smartphone. It was a, you know. So I had absolutely no way. So I said, I don't know. And he said, well, I tell you what, here's a ticket, and when you know, call us and we'll send your suitcase. And I'm a bit upset because I'm tired and it's 2:30 in the morning and it's hot and sweaty, and I realize that I don't have any, you know, toothbrush or toothpaste or underwear or anything, you know, anything like that, you know, bloody hell. So anyway, but it's going to be okay, because when I get out through the arrivals door, there's going to be a guy waiting there with my name on it, and then I'll get in the car and he'll take me somewhere, and then everything will be all right, and maybe the hotel can give me a toothbrush or something like that, you know. So that's absolutely fine. But I didn't have any contact details of anybody because they were all in my suitcase, which hadn't arrived. So I walked out of arrivals into this incredibly dusty, hot and stuffy arrivals lounge with crowds of people all around, noise and crowds of people. Now, I don't know if you've ever arrived at an airport where someone is going to meet you and they have your name on a... Have you done that?
Yes. Yes.
It's fantastic. You can see your name from a long way away because we recognize our name. It's so clear to us. So I walked out very confidently.
What a welcome. No name.
And I walked up and down, and there was nobody with my name. And I thought, well, that's okay, because sometimes people, you know, the drivers, they sometimes get there a bit late, maybe. I don't know. But there's no one. So that's exactly like that, you see, exactly like that. And oh, thank you. I love you. I mean, obviously in a good way. So anyway, so I thought, well, I'll wait for a bit. So I waited for a bit, and then I thought, you know what, maybe I didn't see it. I mean, my mind tells me that, of course, I would have seen it if it had been there, but maybe, so I started going, and then I walked right out, and then I came back and started looking. And all the other drivers were sort of going, and I walked around, and I looked, and I looked, and I looked, and I never found anyone with my name. And then I thought, what do I do? Because I've no idea where I'm going. I'm lost. Do I just stay here? What do I do? I don't know the name of my hotel. And so I was standing there feeling a bit unhappy and sort of lonely and, you know. And I noticed a man over there. He looked sort of Europeanish, you know, and he was looking a bit lost and hopeless too. So we sort of went. And then eventually we you know how you do, and then you know, and all these Indian guys are coming and saying, taxi, one taxi, come with me, I got a taxi. And you think, I'm not going in your taxi. No chance, you know. No. So, Hi. Phew, we talk to each other. Hi. Hi. Are you waiting for someone? Yes, he said, my driver hasn't arrived. I said, my driver hasn't arrived either. He said, where are you from? Oh, my name's Christian. I'm from Denmark. Oh, hi, Christian. I'm Jeremy from England. Yeah.
And the silence.
What are you going to do? Well, I don't know. I tell you what, I think there's an official taxi rank there, and so I'm going to get a taxi and go to my hotel. And I said, well, yeah, that's a really good idea. My only problem is I don't know which hotel I'm going to. So what do I say to the taxi driver? And I don't even know the address of the British Council. I mean, I was in a mess, you know, it was terrible. So he said, I tell you what, why don't you come with me to my hotel, and then you can work it out from there. And okay, I mean, I didn't have anything to lose. At least he was being nice to me. He wasn't trying to sell me. You know, you feel really on your own, you know. And now I'd got my best friend for life, Christian. Love it. So we went to the taxi place to get a ticket. At that moment, a man came running up and said, Mr. Christian, Mr. Christian, Mr. Christian, where have you been? And he said, I've been waiting. No, I've been here all the time. You weren't waiting. Liar, liar. His nose started growing like this. Liar, 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 liar. You know, I don't know, he'd been drinking with his friend. I don't know what, but he said, I'm here. So Christian said, okay, well, and he said, take me to my hotel. So, and then he said, come with me to my hotel. So I said, thank you so much. It was such a relief to get into a car and be going somewhere, and to leave what was, to be honest, not a very pleasant environment. So I got in the car and we drove through the hotel district of New Delhi. Hotels everywhere. And we finally got to his hotel, which was called the Park Hotel. And I said, thank you so much, Christian. It's really kind of you. And he checked in, and he started getting his things and going down the corridor. And then I walked up to the desk and I said, and they said, yes, so how can we help you? No, I mustn't do the accent. How can we help you? So I said, is it possible to have a room for 4 or 5 hours just? Because I thought I'll just sleep for a little bit, and then at 9 o'clock I'll find out the address of the British Council and I'll ring them up and tell them where I am. And the man said, no, sir, I'm sorry, sir. It's either 24 hours or nothing. Okay. So I said, oh, all right, then give me a room. Because I was desperate. I just wanted a shower. Then what? I don't know. I just, or just to lie down on a bed. I was desperate. I said, all right, give me a room then. And they said, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Can we have your passport, please? So I gave them my passport. And they opened my passport. He said, Mr. Harmer, we've been expecting you. Where have you been? And I screamed. And Christian, who was walking down, he said, what's that? I said, you never believe what just happened. I don't know what you call that, karma, coincidence, or something like that. But it was an extraordinary moment because I don't know if you've ever had moments like that where you're just completely lost. I remember another one once where I was in a foreign city. I can't remember where it was. But it was a city where, a bit like being in Yerevan, except Yerevan has some signs in English orthography, where I went into a supermarket today and I was blind because there were all these signs saying what was in the aisles, but I couldn't, I'm blind because I can't read a single letter of Armenian script. So this was a city like that, where I was blind. I I couldn't read anything, and where most of the people didn't speak English. And in the same kind of way, I walked out of my hotel because I needed some fresh air. I just arrived from the airport. This time I did know my hotel. I just arrived from the airport and I just wanted to stretch my legs. So I walked out of and I was thinking about something. I went walking out and I walked a few blocks. And then I suddenly realized that I'd made a fatal error, which was not to take account of where I had been going and where I'd come from. So I looked around me because I thought I'd go back to the hotel now, which I didn't know the name of. And I looked around me and I suddenly realized I had no idea where I'd come from. And I had no idea where I'd walked. And I thought, well, that's all right because I've got my hotel key card. And that'll tell me, and then, and then I pulled out my hotel key card to find that it was blank white. And just for a moment in that situation, I had a moment of, I'm a grown-up, well, sort of grown-up, and I had a moment of absolute panic, complete panic. The thing about the story in New Delhi is it's a good story. It's true. But do you think I've told it before? Have I told that story before? Yeah, of course I have. Of course I have. I like telling that story. And I've told it in this kind of situation, but I've told it when I got home to my family. I've told it to my friends. When we're sitting around, sometimes me and people like Scott or Jim Scrivener, as we're sitting around having a drink, and I'll tell that story. And what it makes me think of is that everyone in this room has a story like that. It may not be about a hotel or an airport or taxi drivers, but we've all got stories like that. You'll never guess what happened to me. Do you know what happened to me the other day? I had this incredible experience. Everybody does that. We all do that all the time. We tell stories, don't we? And everyone has a favorite story or some favorite stories. It's part of what we do. And some of them are stories you'll never guess who I met in the supermarket. Or I'll tell you the story of how I was running in a car park and I tripped over and my head hit the pavement. I'll tell you that story. We all tell stories all the time. Because stories have power. Stories have enormous power. So that story I told you about New Delhi Airport, the old airport, it's got a lot of things in it. It sort of tells us, it was engaging. I know it was, and of course, yes, I know, and this is a particular situation where you're all very kindly listening to me anyway. But if I told it round the dinner table, I think you'd still have been quite, because it's an engaging story. It's stories of coincidence like that are rather amazing. But stories also tell us who we are and where we come from. So even in that story, which is just the story about one person in an airport, there's an awful lot of information about who I am, where I come from, what we expect, how the culture of airports works. There's all sorts of cultural information wrapped up in that story, and so on and so forth. And also, the other thing which is really important is stories allow us to explain who we are. So when you tell a story about something that happened to you, if you tell me a story about something that happened to you, I will pretty soon get an idea of the kind of person you are. Because the things that you choose to tell me, or the bits of the story that you decide to emphasize or find funny or alarming, will tell you something. So you now know a little bit more about me because of something that happened to me. But there's something about, I've no idea what it makes you think of me, and I don't want to know. Thank you very much. But there's something about some of the things I told you about my reactions, about what I'd done, what I hadn't done, which has given you some more idea of who I am. And stories do that all the time. If you tell me a story from your family life, or a story from your childhood, or a story from your travels, or something, I'll learn a little bit, not just about what happened, but I'll learn about you. Because you get to explain who you are without having to say, listen, this is who I am. You just tell a story instead. By the way, hello to the people who were watching this on the live stream, wherever you are. As I said this morning, earlier this afternoon, if you were with us, I'm sorry you aren't here face to face, but it's great to have you with us anyway. Stories help us to understand stuff. And especially for children, stories help them to understand all sorts of things about the world and values and morality and ethics
Psychology.
and things.
Psychology.
And the psychology, the way people behave, all that kind of thing. Absolutely. Stories, and the stories that are... one of the things that I don't know how long it would take me to learn Armenian if I came to live here. But something that would take me longer than learning Armenian, because if I had what someone said earlier today, the dedication to learn Armenian, I might learn it reasonably quickly, or to learn a sort of B1 level of Armenian reasonably quickly. But to understand the culture of Armenia, that's a different thing. And a lot of that would depend on me becoming familiar with the stories of Armenia, the stories that Armenians tell to each other, the stories that kind of are part of the fabric of Armenian cultural life, just as coming to Britain, if you want to come and live in Britain, part of that, or if I go to Iran, I need to understand some of the cultural stories that knit that society together. And the fact is, all of us tell stories all the time. And some people tell them too much of the time. But seriously, and some of the stories are long stories, like the time I arrived at New Delhi airport. But some of them are little stories. You know, you'll never guess who I met, and he said, and I said, and boom, end. But we all tell stories. It's one of the ways we communicate what we think about, what we feel. And the other thing we do, we tell the same stories again and again and again. And there's both good things and bad things about that. The good thing is that if you tell a story again and again, you get better at telling it. Seriously, you start believing, and you start believing it. Yes. Have I told you about the time that I saved the world? You know, but you get better and better at telling it, because you learn through the reaction of the people who hear your stories which bits they find most impressive, which bits they react to, and so you kind of emphasize those and do things like that. You kind of, and if you're a good storyteller, of course, it sounds like every time, it sounds like you're telling the story for the first time. It's a bit like music, I suppose. If you go to hear a really, one of the greatest experiences you ever have in the concert hall or in the salon or whatever you call it, is when you go and hear a musician playing a piece of music written by someone who's been dead for 300 years, who everyone in the world plays, but they make you believe you're hearing it for the first time. It's an amazing experience. There's something about the power of some musicians to do that. And stories are like that. So you know, if I can tell you a story and make you believe that I've never told that story ever before, even though it's a fantastically good performance, wow, what a joy that is. We repeat stories all the time, and we get better at telling the story. The really bad thing about that is we repeat stories all the time. And you get this situation where you do literally say to people, have I ever told you about the time that I... And they say, no, I don't think so. So you launch into your story. And halfway through, you suddenly remember the time you told them exactly the same story. Have you ever had that experience? Yeah. And then you face this terrible decision. What do? Do you go on or stop? If you stop, the whole experience goes. But if you go on, and you lose, anyway, enough. That's what stories are all about. Now, of course, from the point of view of language learning, and by the way, we had a very interesting short little discussion about this just after the last talk. From the point of view of language learning, stories have enormous potential. You know this, because there are classic stories that come back again and again and again. With children's storytelling, you often get things like, once upon a time, and there's a kind of, it's a genre. Fairy tales have a kind of genre structure about them, and children become very comfortable with this, and it helps them to know what to expect and to interpret that. But it's not just that. In terms of languages, stories have very, very common narrative tenses, narrative phrases, narrative structures, which are used again and again and again. And of course, a good story, especially fairy tales and stories for kids, you get repetition of words and phrases throughout the story. It's like a good joke. A good long joke has the same kind of thing. The this, and then the this, and then the this, and then this, and this, and this, and it gets repeated again and again. And that has enormous power if you're hearing this language for the first time. Of course, you've got lots of wonderful lexical cohesion. I wonder if Scott talked about that last year, because he's very strong on this. The way in which words kind of thread through a story and interconnect and tie the story together linguistically. And of course, you have memorable, if the story's any good, it's memorable. You remember it. And if the story's any good, there are words and phrases there which you're going to remember because they're part of it.
They stick to you.
And they stick to you. They stick to the something. They stick to the air. They stick to your brain. Something like that. And those last two really matter because it's the memorable. The memorable. That's what we're after. The memorable. The memorable. So, what I want to do now is let you hear another story, and then let's talk about what we can do with it in terms of language. Mm-hmm. Because the claim for storytelling is that by retelling a story, students get to, if you like, achieve that stickiness, and that retelling a story is really good. And we get iterative language practice. So, there are some words. Have you seen one of these before? Have you seen one of these before? This kind of word cloud? Have you seen that? Of course you have. How did I do it? How did I make that word cloud?
By brainstorming.
I used a very simple piece of software, free software. Anybody know what it's called? Yes, that's the one. It's called Wordle.net. So if you haven't heard of it, that's WORDLE. 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 .net. N-E-T. And what you do is you put in any text you want, and then you press return, and it gives you something like that. Like that. So I asked someone to tell me a story, and I videoed them telling me a short little story. Then I listened to the story, and I typed it all out, exactly what this person said, and then I put it in Wordle, and that's what came out. So what I want you to do is to read all those words, just read them, and make sure that you understand all the words. Okay. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is to turn to somebody else and see if you can guess what the story is. What's the story? Have a guess. See if you can guess what the story is about. As much as you can guess.
What does this word mean next to seconds? D-I-O-N?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Someone has reminded me that Wordle is a bit strange. So it's come up with this word D-O-N. D-O-N, right?
D-I-O-N. Yes. D-O-N and D-I-O-N.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. And the reason for that is Wordle doesn't like apostrophes and things like that. So it's don't and that kind of thing. And don't and didn't. It was supposed to be don't and didn't. Yeah. So it separated that bit of the word from the apostrophe. Okay, just talk to the person. Any idea what it's about? Just see if you can guess what it's about. Just talk to someone next to you. Just any guesses? Any guesses? Okay, thank you. Any ideas? Any ideas?
About someone having a bad experience.
About someone having a bad experience. More ideas? Yes? Something to do with the life of a student? An unusual day in the life of a student or a teacher. Anything else? What? Somebody having to take an exam. Any other ideas? A student slept. It's about a student who slept.
It's about her interpretation about a specific lesson.
It's about somebody's interpretation of a lesson. Yes, please.
The teacher who couldn't concentrate on a lesson because he didn't sleep all the night.
Because the teacher, I think personal experience speaking, a teacher. No, I'm joking. A teacher who couldn't concentrate on the lesson because they didn't sleep the night before.
Boring lessons?
What?
Something like that. Lost kiss.
A lost kiss. Oh my word! Isn't that wonderful? 3 words and there's a whole story in my mind. A lost kiss.
Boring lesson?
A boring lesson.
Sleeping while the lesson.
Somebody sleeping while the lesson went on, or something. Okay, let me introduce you to a teacher called Dennis. And Dennis at the time was teaching at, where do you think she's from, Dennis? She's from Turkey, because Dennis is a very popular female name in Turkey, whereas Dennis to me sounds in English like a male name, but it's a Turkish female name. Okay, so for a book of mine called Essential Teacher Knowledge, I did some interviews. I just got teachers to tell little teaching stories. And this was Dennis's story.
I heard this, listening after this most striking experience ever for me, because I usually don't have really serious problems. It was we had 8 weeks in one module, and it was the second week of that module, and it was on a Wednesday, and it was the second lesson, when one student showed up hungry. And I was teaching, I was writing something on the board, the door without knocking or anything, just opened. He came in, and we all stopped looking at him, like, no, here. He didn't say anything, not even good morning. And he walked across the room, sat down on one of the chairs, without saying anything, and he had this wallet, car keys, and cell phone in his hand. He put them on the desk, and then he went to sleep. And we just kept watching him. We were all very surprised. So we checked the attendance list to see who he was, because I was only missing one student, so it was easy to figure out his name. The thing I did was nothing. I just let him sleep for 10 minutes. I waited for him to go to this deep sleep, and then I started teaching very loudly. And then he woke up, and I said, sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up, but you know what, this is a classroom, and you are doing a lot of work for academic purposes. If you want, you can just go downstairs to the library to have a better nap. And then he never slept again.
That's Dennis's story. So, what I'd like you to do very quickly is just with the person sitting next to you, just make sure you agree on the story. What did she say? What's the story? Okay, off you go. Just agree on the story. Agree on the story. What happened? Okay. I've just looked at the clock, so I realize we have to hurry up. So here's a task for you. Here's a task for you. I want you to imagine that you were one of the students in Dennis's class. Not the student who fell asleep, but one of the other students. Okay, so you were there. So now, I want you, in the person of a student who was there, who could please tell me the story of what happened to you? Somebody, would you tell me the story? Somebody, please tell me the story. Somebody? Somebody? Yes, please, thank you. Could you stand up so we can all hear you? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So we were in our classroom, we were having our lesson with Miss Denise, and she was writing something on the board, and suddenly one of our classmates came in. He rushed to the desk, he sat down, he took the keys, or he or she, I was not sure. He took the keys out of his pocket, cell phone, and and what was there? Okay, and wallet and cell phone, and then he fell asleep. Surprisingly, Miss Denise let him sleep for about 10 minutes, and then she started teaching lesson in a very loud voice. So our friend woke up suddenly, and Miss Denise apologized. She said that it was not the right environment for sleeping, and asked him to go out of the classroom and sleep somewhere outside. That was the story.
Yeah! Thank you. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now, oh, I've got another microphone here. Now, so there we are, you see. It works. Storytelling, storytelling, and retelling. And it worked. She could tell the story perfectly. So it's like magic, isn't it? Wait a minute. But is that enough? The problem about this experiment we've just had is that you speak really good English. Everyone in this room speaks really good English. So remembering the story was no trouble at all. And retelling the story was no trouble at all. It was just like retelling a story that your grandmother told you. You speak really good Armenian, so that's not a problem. Sorry?
Otherwise, you had to concentrate on the words which you didn't know before.
Otherwise, because that was really fluent, it sounded like she was in the class, because she didn't have to think of the words. And she wasn't, and when she heard Dennis talking, she didn't spend all her time saying, what does that mean? What does that mean? Help? Huh? She didn't need any memory aids to help her tell the story, because it was just like anybody else telling a story in real life. You told a story, you repeated it. Is that enough for teaching a language? No, it isn't. Because if you had been my students of English, my teenager or my adult students of English, B1 level, could you have done that? No. A2 level? No. And even B1 level, or even B2 level, you probably couldn't have done it because it takes more than that to hear something in English and reproduce it. Maybe it takes more than that. So, let's see. I'm so sorry. We don't have time for that. I'm going to go straight on to something else. It's my own stupid fault. I'm going to tell you another story now. Only this time, I want you to get out a pen and a piece of paper. Or if you want, a phone or an iPad or something. Somebody asked me yesterday, who was it who asked me yesterday whether teaching students how to write in cursive script was important? It was you, wasn't it? That's right. And next time we have a break, I wonder if you'd like to ask each other that. How important is it to teach young children to write well, to handwrite well? Handwriting. In 2017, 2020, 2025. It's a really big question. And unfortunately, we're not going to discuss it. Anyway, so I'm going to tell you a story. What I want you to do is to write down words from the story. Any words you hear, any phrases you hear. Now, this is an impossible situation because everyone speaks far too good English for this to be real. But the best thing we can do is a simulacrum of a classroom experience and just to make the point. So I'm going to tell you a story. And in this story, I want you to write down as many words as you can of the story, or phrases. If you try and write down what I'm saying, you will explode, because this is not a dictation. There's no chance you can write as fast as I will speak, even though your English is perfect. So what you better do is just write down any words or phrases that come to mind, and you must all do this. You must have a piece of paper and a pen. You must, or you must write down on your phone. You must. There is no free time coming. And if you do not do this task, I will kill you. Okay, I won't. Okay, I won't. That's not true. But please, 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 because in order for this to work, we need everybody to do this task. Okay. So this is the story of a woman called Cristina Torres. And Cristina Torres lives in New York. And when she thinks of what happened, she wonders whether it has anything to do with the fact that her father was for some years the manager of the New York Jets, a baseball team. I think I've got the name right, I'm not sure, but if I haven't, God forgive me. Anyway, she wonders if that had something to do with it. But on the day in question, one day, she went to visit a friend of hers who'd just had a baby. And this is kind of exciting when your friend has their first baby, and to go and visit them and meet the baby for the first time. It's an exciting moment. And so she was going to Brooklyn Heights, a part of New York called Brooklyn Heights, to see her friend and to meet this little baby for the first time. And to take it a present, which is to say, obviously, to take the mother a present, but you know what I mean. And on the way to meet her friend, she decided to stop off at a cafe to have a sort of coffee and a bun, you know. And the reason she chose this particular coffee is that she herself, Christina, had once lived in the neighborhood, and she always used to go to this cafe, so she thought it'd be fun to go back there and have a coffee and a bun. So she went in, and the cafe was sort of outside at the bottom of a brownstone, you know, one of these buildings here with the brownstone and the fire escape and everything else like that. And so she went in and she bought herself a cup of coffee and a bun, and she took them outside. It was a nice day, and sat at a table and started having her coffee and a bun. And as she was having her coffee, a man came up beside her, and in a very quiet voice, that was a bit creepy to be honest, but he came up beside her, you know. And in a very quiet voice, he said, could you phone 911, please? Now, I don't know if you know, but 911 is the emergency number in the US. He said, could you phone 911? He said, there's a baby on the fire escape. And she looked behind, and right up there, about 7 floors up, there was a little baby on the fire escape. It looked to be about 8 months old. It was 8 months old, as it turned out, but it looked to be about 8 months old. And of course, and at that moment, all the other people in the cafe turned around and saw it, and everyone became very scared. Because, of course, if the little baby, who had no idea of the danger it was in, had fallen off the fire escape, the results are too horrible to imagine. So, and the baby was up there kind of, you know, moving around, and so Christina, on her cell phone, very quietly told the emergency authorities that there was a baby on the fire escape. Some of the other people in the cafe ran inside the building to run upstairs to the apartment where the baby must have come from, to knock on doors to find the parents to see if they could go out onto the fire escape and get the baby. Christina looked round, and as she spoke, she engaged the baby in eye contact, and she had some idea that maybe if she sort of, you know, smiled at the baby would be happy and stay where it was. But it didn't. And as she watched, the baby reached the edge of the fire escape, and it fell. And as it fell, it hit a sign for yoga classes. I mean, she remembers that detail. For yoga classes, it hit this sign, and at which point immediately blood started spurting from its head. And Christina, without much thought, just slightly repositioned herself under the fire escape and held out her hands, her arms. And the baby fell and fell right into her arms. She said, Dylan, that was the name of the baby, it turned out. Dylan, he was as light as a feather. And he fell into her arms and was screaming. And then he kind of looked up at her and stopped screaming and started giggling. Happy, happy, happy. And people rushed up to her and hugged her, told her what an angel she was. The parents came and they got Dylan, and everyone said how wonderful she was. Oh, my word, you've just saved a baby's life. And it was only later, when she was going home on the subway, that she suddenly had a feeling of what she had done and the enormity of it. Well, she burst into tears without thinking about it, because all she could think about is what would have happened if she hadn't caught the baby. And that's the story of Christina Torres. Now, my dear students, what I want you to do is to turn to each other and to compare the words and phrases you've written. It's a true story, obviously. I'll explain why in a minute. It's a true story. I want you to compare the words and phrases you've written down. See if you've written down the same things. And if there are any words or phrases there that you don't understand, ask your neighbour. Off you go. Compare. What time should I finish?
3:30. But
it's going to be a few minutes more, yeah, because I want to do one more thing.
We can get there at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, that's fine. It gives us time.
So I'm going to ask Eric to go away. We'll take a taxi there.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on, go on. Do you talk to each other? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, if you were real students, I'd do exactly the same thing all over again. I'd tell you the story again, have you write down more words, and gradually you accumulate all these words. My role in a real lesson is to make sure, as I go around the class, that people do understand the words they've written down and they know the words. And when it's all over, then I'm going to get you to retell the story. But I'll give you time to prepare it, maybe write it up, maybe as a group write it, I don't know, something like that. and I'll get you to retell the story. But this time, I don't have to rely on you being as good as you are. On the contrary, this has actually become a language lesson without any grammatical explanation or any of this kind of rubbish. It's actually become a way of, well, that's an evaluative, pejorative term. I apologize, but without any stress, we've turned this into a kind of language catching activity. I've got you to actually suck the language out of the story and use each other to do it. And then if you write it up as a group, then wow, it's got real power. Now, I was talking with this group of people earlier about story. You will have noticed, by the way, that I haven't talked very much about young learners. And I know there are many people in this room who teach young learners. And forgive me, but I could talk about it for a long time, but it's not an area of my expertise, which is why I kind of avoid it. But a discussion we had briefly after the last talk was whether storytelling for young learners is principally a language-focused activity, or on the contrary, a content-based activity, a learning about the world and life activity. And the worry always is that if you make it into a language activity, it loses its power, for children especially. For their enjoyment, for their reception of the story through all sorts of different medium, through sound and activity and visualization and all that kind of thing. But this way, or something like this, of telling and of capturing the story for yourself, it still isn't a language-based activity, but oh yes it is. And here's one more thing you can do. Now, one of the beauties of living in 2017 is that everything is available for us. So this story, what I'd like you to do now is get your cell phones out. Will you get your cell phones out? Hands up if you have a cell phone. Right. Those of you who've got your cell phone out, please will you get it out? And I want you to Google the following. I want you to Google the following.
What?
I caught a falling baby. I caught a falling baby. I caught a falling baby. Have you found it? Would you read it, please? Would you read it? Would you read it, please? And if you haven't got a cell phone, I'm sorry, you're so last century. If you haven't got a cell phone,
I've always known that I'm very quick.
here is, if you haven't got a cell phone, here's the end of the end of the story. The rest of you, I'd like you to read it on your cell phones. It's very important. Yeah, just read it. It won't take you very long. It's not very long. You haven't got a cell phone?
I am, but we have just looking together.
Okay.
The internet connection is quite
Okay, I tell you what, it's unfair because some of you don't have phones and things like that. But I wanted to make one important point, and the important point is this, that the beauty of being a teacher now, hoy en dia, these days, especially if you're teaching teenagers, adults, university, tertiary, is just this, that if you have a really good story like this to tell, the fact that students can then go on straight away and read it or hear it or listen to it or something like that, it's so powerful. And the beauty of this, of course, is that I've told you this whole story, you've written down words, and now you get to read it as well. Only this time you've got a reason for reading it, which is to see whether the teacher sort of got it right. You know, did I get it right? What did I get wrong? How does Christina's own words actually compare with my version of the story? It's really powerful. And we're doing this language getting, this language gathering, this language catching, if you like, for ourselves. And one last thing, and then I've got 2 more quick activities before we go. 2? We'll see. 2 more quick activities before we go. This is the last paragraph that you will have on your cell phone, or the penultimate paragraph, I think, on your cell phone. What I'd like you to do very quietly is to decide which word or phrase from this paragraph you would most like to put in your suitcase and take away with you. Which word in this paragraph, one word or phrase, just because we don't have much time. But normally I'd say 3 or something like that. So wait. Try and put yourselves in the minds of students. And what I'm trying to say to them is, your suitcase is more important than anybody else's suitcase. And your suitcase is especially more important than the teacher's suitcase. Because remember the boy from Cuba and the woman from Greece. These are people who caught language for themselves. And what I'm encouraging you to do now is decide what language you want to learn. What language would you personally like to take away, lift from that paragraph, put it in your suitcase and take away? Just choose a word or phrase, okay? One word or one phrase. Just for, okay, anybody, quickly?
Are the students overwhelming? Are the teacher?
Yeah, yes, okay. Overwhelming.
What are the teacher finally? What are the teacher I choose finally?
You chose she's a teacher, she's chosen finally. Fair enough. Fair enough, it's her word. I have no right to say whether she should choose that word or not. Anything else? Another one?
Burst into tears.
Burst into tears. It's such a powerful phrase, and if you could remember that, my dear student, and use it, wow, what power, you know? Sorry? Causing quite a commotion. What a wonderful phrase, to cause a commotion. If you could use that, you'd be really good. Yes?
To hold everything together.
To hold everything together. What? As light as a feather. Felt scared. I felt scared.
Put aside.
Put aside everything. Do you get the point? You get the point. If I get you to try and decide what words you want to choose, to catch, to put in your suitcase and take away, the chances are, I can't guarantee anything, but the chances are that's a word or phrase you're going to remember. Yeah. And so what we've done with this story was this rich language work, but it doesn't feel like it. Because what it's all been about is this story. I hope you'll agree this is a compelling story. It's an amazing story. When I read it, I was immediately impressed with it. It's not a big thing, but it's a big thing, you know, and so on. Right, suitcase language. Suitcase language really matters to me. If I can persuade you to get students to choose language that they want to put in their suitcases and take away, we've won the battle. Now, what I was going to do, what I was going to do was to show you this photograph. and ask you where these people were and what you think's happening. I don't have time for that because there's one last thing I want to do, which is better.
It's a film festival. Yeah, it's Sundance Film Festival.
The Sundance Film Festival. Who are the people there? What? They're actors. Who are the women? Teachers? I'm not going to do this tomorrow because we won't have time, but I'm going to do something else which is just as good. Sorry? Okay. This is a truly extraordinary story. There's Shakespeare. So this is me trying to, there's a wonderful word in Spanish, aprovechar, which simply means to take advantage of. But aprovechar sounds better to my ears. To take advantage of the story you told, which is to say, I would like you to find out this extraordinary story before tomorrow, even if you're not coming. I'll give you a first glimpse of the story, and then I'll give you enough information for you to Google it, and it's worth Googling. It's truly amazing. They've shown it in Is there anything strange about that paragraph? Anything strange in there? What? What's strange? He walks out of the apartment. He is the first of his siblings to do this. So this is your task. I want you, when you leave here, to Google something called the Wolfpack. The Wolfpack. The Wolfpack, and find out about Mukunda and the Angelo family. The Angelo family. You will be amazed at what you find, I promise you. So the Wolfpack it is, and the story is worth your time. And it raises many issues. And anyway, just find it. You will, I promise you, it's worth your time. I want to end with how to tell a really good story. I've got one more story for you, only this time a really good storyteller is going to tell you the story. She's a good friend of mine called Jan Blake. And while she tells this story, or maybe afterwards when you think about it, I'm not going to say anything about it because it's time to go. It takes about 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. Have a think about some of the ways that she makes this story so compelling. Is it through repetition? Is it through the way she tells the story? Is it her tone of voice? What is it? And now I know that you've been doing workshops precisely about things like gesture and tone of voice and emphasis and repetition and all those things. I'm interested very much in how Jan achieves this. But here we are. Are you ready? Yeah. This is a story called The Leopardess by Jan Blake.
Once upon a time, a man walked across the African plains with his wife. The man carried his spear and a bow and arrow across his back. The woman had a baby tied across her back. As they walked, the husband turned to his wife and he said, "Wife, I'm hungry. You have the ability to turn yourself into a leopardess. Put down the baby, transform yourself, chase down that herd of bush cows. Catch one bush calf for me, bring it back, change yourself back into a woman, skin it, clean it, cook it, prepare it the way I like it, and feed me." The woman said, "But husband, are you not a hunter? Do you not have your spear? Do you not have your bow and your arrow?" And he said, "I am your husband. If I tell you to turn yourself into a leopardess, you will. If I tell you to chase down that herd of bush cow, you will. If I tell you to bring back a bush cow, skin it, cook it, prepare it, and serve it to me, you will, because I am your husband." The Lord said, "Are you sure you know what you're asking?" And he said, "Yes, I do, and do as you are told." So the woman untied the baby and set him on the ground. That woman, her eyes became the eyes of a leopard. That woman, her teeth became the teeth of a leopard, and her hands became the paws of a leopard, and her back became the back of a leopard, and her skin became the fur of a leopard, and her heart became the heart of a leopard. And she looked at her husband and she said, and that man was so afraid, he ran to the nearest tree and up into the branches, and he clung on for dear life. That woman, that leopard woman, she turned and she ran across the plains, chasing down the herd of bush cow. She turned the herd this way and she turned the herd that way. She chased and she chased until she fell upon the youngest of the bush calf, the tenderest meat. She fell upon his throat, she tore his throat open, she brought the bush calf back to where the baby was laying. And that woman, that leopard woman, her fur became the skin of a woman, and her back became the back of a woman, and her paws became the hands of a woman, and her teeth became the teeth of a woman, and her eyes became the eyes of a woman, and her heart became the heart of a woman. And that woman, she skinned that bush calf, she cleaned the bush calf, she built a fire, she pushed a stick through the bush calf's body, she made a spit, she turned and she roasted, and she turned and she roasted, and she turned and she roasted the meat. And when that meat was cooked to a turn, she cut some of the meat and prepared it the way her husband liked it. She looked up at the tree and she said, "Husband, come down. Here is your meat." He refused to come down from the tree. "Husband," she said, "here's your meat. Come, eat." He refused to leave that tree. At that moment, the baby began to cry. The woman lifted the baby. She dropped her blouse. She latched the baby to her breast. And it was then and only then that her husband recognized her. He came down from the top of that tree. He grabbed the piece of meat his wife had prepared for him. He went to one side, and watching his wife, he ate and he ate and he ate. When he was satisfied that his wife was back to her true self, he said, "Woman, put out the fire, gather the meat, wrap it, put the baby on your back. We must leave." Of course, husband, she said. She put out the fire, she gathered the meat, she wrapped it in its own skin, she put the baby on her back, she tied it tight, and before they left she said, "Husband, there's something I must say. Remember, my name is woman, and I am capable of anything you ask of me. In the future, be careful what you
That's what I call real storytelling.
Thank you.
And the problem is, can we be Jan Blake? And the answer is not without a lot of skill, practice, and talent. This, after all, is her occupation. She is a professional storyteller. But I think we can be enough like Jan Blake to have the same kind of power. And what I hope I've suggested in this talk is how to turn the act of storytelling into a wonderful language-catching opportunity without forcing it to be a tremendously answer-teaching grammar exercise. Thank you very much. See you later.
Okay, thank you so much, Sharon. I think your husband was Armenian, by the way. The only thing I think is